Well, Debbie, it is an honour to have you on one of our fireside chats today. Really, I mean, I've been following you for a long time, and I've been watching this debate, everything that's been going on, because it keeps coming up in the press. It featured in our political campaigns and election, and I think we are at a bit of a crux point now with some of that which you and I have discussed, and we did just before we hit the record button. But before we get into all of that, I wanted to talk about you, your transition, your life story, just to give us some more context of what it was like for you to transition and versus what it's like for people transitioning now, actually, because it's very different times, isn't it?
Well, it is. It's only 14 years since I transitioned in 2012, but the whole landscape has changed and the expectations have changed as well. So when I transitioned back in 2012, the expectation was that you would fit in. And if you didn't fit in, then you had to work a bit harder on this. The aim was to reintegrate into society and be taken as the opposite sex without it being remarkable at all. That was the goal. And if I'd gone back to my trans support group at the time and complained about being misgendered, as the words become, the advice that had been given would at the time would have been, well, you're not trying hard enough, Debbie. Put some more effort into this, and you won't get misgendered. So that was the expectations back in 2012. So it's just over a decade ago. Is this? It's not too long ago. But it seems now that the expectations are that and certainly in trans groups, is that the whole world will revolve around what you want and what you think. And if you're being, if people are using the pronouns for you, which you would prefer they didn't, it's not your problem for not fitting in. It's their problem for not reading the sign or reading the badge. And they've got to change their way of thinking rather than you changing your way of acting. So it's very, very different, Victoria.
Mm. I mean, people have actually lost their jobs over this misgendering, which some of it has been quite by accident. I mean, obviously we had the Starbucks, was it Starbucks down here somewhere actually, I think, or Southampton, that story that went viral around the world and um very aggressive towards that woman. I actually don't know whether she did that deliberately. It didn't seem to be the case from the footage I saw, but um I think to lose your job or get reprimanded for a slip of the tongue or um yeah, I'm not entirely sure I agree with that.
Yeah, as well as everything else, I'm a union rep in school,
Yeah.
and for somebody to be pulled up on a disciplinary for such things, it's something I would defend. I would defend staunchly on the grounds of free speech, people's right to choose the words which they want to use, and to be honest, what is wrong with being called a man or or having the other pronoun used? I've got female friends with ambiguous names such as Chris and
Mm,
Joe and Robin who regularly get heed and hemmed, and it's not an issue.
mm,
At best they'll laugh about it, and at worst they've just given up. They've just given up even paying any attention to it. So
mm.
just using another pronoun is not in itself oppressing somebody, but it seems to be viewed that way.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know if any of you are on TikTok, but there's a trans influencer on there, Lily, can't remember her name, but surname, but she goes around videoing people misgendering her, and then their faces are splashed all over TikTok, and this gets repurposed on X and
Yeah.
Instagram, and I'm just not sure that's the best way to educate people.
Well, and I suspect you can monetize that if you're selling advertising space on TikTok and X, then it'll be that can bring in a stream of income.
Yeah.
And the best way of bringing the income in is to outrage people. That's the fuel of Twitter. That's what keeps Twitter going. But to cause outrage and upset, and the more
Mm.
outrage you can create, the more clicks you're going to get, and the more advertising revenue you're going to bring in. but it's not a healthy way for anybody to be living their lives or making part of their living that way at all.
No, no, I agree. And so on your transition, what was, if you don't mind talking about it, but what was the process like back then? Because obviously we've had the CAS review this year, a report, it's the fires still burning on that, from all sorts of people, doctors and what have you. But what was it like for you going through the transition back then? You said you were part of a trans support group.
Yeah, the demographic there was very different. The groups were different to what trans groups are like now. The trans
Mm,
groups, which you will hear from now, are very different. We were a group of, to put it one way, middle-aged men who would like to become middle-aged women. That was the group. We were 30, mid-30s and older. So the age range was mid 30s through to I think the oldest was late 70s actually. So
oh wow.
that gives you the age range. We tended to be we tended to be professionals, people who could argue their own case, people who could people who'd often done very well in life because you had to be able to uh, work your own way through a system.
Mm,
So there was the most of us went through an NHS pathway at the time, which was still coping with demand.
mm,
So you went to see your GP, and your GP then gave you a referral to a local psychiatrist, and then the local psychiatrist gave you a referral to the gender clinic. And you had to say the right things at each time, and we used to school each other on what you needed to say to get through the various levels of gatekeeping. It was never very difficult, but what they were trying to screen out always was people who I think, to be fair on the system, was people whose lives would not be improved by transitioning, people who were not able to understand what they were doing, people who were not able to take responsibility for what they were doing as well.
mm,
So the very fact that we could work out what questions were going to be asked, work out what answers we're going to give, and then take responsibility for that did narrow the field down quite a bit. So we were pretty much of a muchness, and among that group, there were a lot of engineers, computer programmers, uh, railway workers. These were quite typical male
wow.
professions.
Yeah.
The idea that we were somehow typically women in our outlook and our professional choices was nonsense. And I was a bit of an outlier being a teacher, actually. There was another teacher, but most were more stereotypically male professions and had been very successful in these professions as
Mm,
well. There was a barrister, a practicing solicitor who ran a huge law practice. So there were very, very successful people. So we got a referral to the the gender clinic, and we gave the right answers to the questions and tended to sail through the process. But at all times we were taking the idea was we were taking responsibility for those decisions, and I guess we were of an age and a background where we were used to taking responsibility for the decisions that we made. So that was the medical side of it.
mm,
Yes, through the NHS I was prescribed hormone therapy, and then I was referred for gender reassignment surgery in 2016, and that was all as an NHS patient from beginning to end. So that was what it was like then from that medical side.
mm,
From a family side, which at the time I overlooked completely. At the time in 2012, I was married to Stephanie, and we'd been married for 19 years at the time, and our children were 15. How old were they in 2012? 15, 12, and 10 at the time. So that was the background I was coming from. Stephanie, it wasn't an easy time for us as a couple, should we say.
yeah.
Stephanie was superb, and she's written a little about from her experience as well. And there's some pieces out which have been published by her, which explain it from her perspective. But it's fair to say that she was the person who held things together at home
Mm.
and worked it through with the children, the children's teachers, our friends. Well, my head was in the clouds. Now, 14 years later, we're still married. So Stephanie's out at work. She's out at work at the moment, but we're still married. Our children are now 27, 24, and 22. The little one should be with us, but he's away. And the I call him the little one. He's 22. He's still my,
Yeah,
he's
it's
still
sort
my,
of,
he's
yeah.
still my little one. The middle one is staying with us at the moment. So as a family, outwardly we look peculiar because people are never sure what to make of myself and Stephanie. But as a family at home, it it feels normal for us because it is normal, and I
Yeah,
think much of what goes on at home is refreshingly normal.
yeah.
And we've worked with a situation that we've found ourselves in.
That's quite something to come through all that, because I mean, if you look at the British society more generally now, and the general dysfunction. I mean, I come from a very dysfunctional family, so hats off to you, that you've all managed to come through this and hold the family unit together. I think it's a lovely story, and I've seen pictures of you both, and I have read some of her writings on it. It's, yeah, it's incredible. I mean, it's very inspiring, and to be in the position you are all in today. I mean, it's incredible. So looking at, well, I mean, you go through the transition. Did Was there anything about society? Did you get any hit back? Was there a lot of transphobia back then, or did it just, was it?
People people didn't care.
Yeah,
People have got their own problems to worry about. As long as you
yeah,
don't, as long as you don't get in their way
mm,
and try to impose yourself on them,
mm,
then what's the issue? So people didn't care. I think there was one or two instances with groups of young men and alcohol. There was a couple of those situations
mm-hmm,
I got away from those situations quickly, including one on a train. I was sat on a train carriage, and there was a group of men in their early 20s sat around a table, and the table was full of beer cans, that sort of
yeah,
thing.
yeah,
And
yeah,
one of them spotted me, and the conversation was moving from taking the ridiculing this other person in the carriage to I thought it was getting quite nasty, so I moved. I thought,
mm,
as I just moved. But that was few and far between. Mostly people are curious. And there's one story. This came later, but uh, this was about 3-4 years ago. So about 2011, I think it was. So it was just after as we were coming out of the pandemic. And I was at St James's Park tube station in London. And a woman came up. She was in her mid 60s, and she was laden down with groceries. And so I'm stood there. I'm 6 foot. She's about 5'2", laden down with groceries. And she looks up at me, and she's obviously puzzled. And she says, "Are you one of them blokes?" And I thought, what do you do with this? I said, "Why, yes, so I am." And she said, "You're very convincing." And I said, "Well, clearly not convincing enough." And she sort of said, "Good on you," and wandered off with her groceries. Now, that's a situation that I could have played totally differently. I was amused by it, and
mm,
what this spoke to me was not that she was in any way. She was just curious.
yeah,
She'd possibly read about people transitioning, possibly heard about it, and suddenly there was this person on the platform with her who she clocked as trans and had no better language for it than one of them blokes. And I don't think that should be seen as transphobic, horrible, oppressive, when clearly it wasn't. And I think if we assume that people tend to operate with the best of motives until
mm.
we find out otherwise, then surely that's a better way to live.
Well, I think that's the difference in society, and just well, less than a decade that you I mean, we've run a lot of EDI training sessions at EPA, and one of the we've worked with diverse matters, and one of the things the CEO always says at the beginning, or whichever trainer we've had on the session, no question is a silly question, like, because you can't ask questions now because people get offended. That's the society we live. So I mean, you said the word curiosity. I mean, it's a great thing to have. And I'm naturally very inquisitive and curious, so I'll always ask questions. And some bosses don't like that from EAs that ask too many questions. But I think we've lost a bit of that in recent years, and it is sad actually. It is sad. Now the trans debate has changed. And do you know what, Debbie? I didn't realise how far some of this had actually gone, even though I'm quite well versed on this, until I was in a gym,
Yeah.
trying to lose a few menopausal pounds, and I've joined up to a gym. I don't particularly like gyms much anyway, but I thought I'll give it a go. So I do a late class in the evening. I go into the changing room, and there's a naked biological man in the women's changing room. And I felt instant fear. My whole body, you can't, as a woman, that's a reaction to have. And this wasn't even a transgender person. This was a man in a space that was created for me and my gender. And so I did say to him, "What are you doing in here? I don't think I think you've got the wrong changing room." So I went. I know male violence, so I knew not to get his back up straight away. But yeah, I did. I kind of said that, and he said, "I've got every right to be in here." And I said, "But this is the women's changing room." And I mean, he's completely naked, and I can see his tackle. And I'm just thinking, how the hell do I get out of here safely? And he said to me, I said, "I don't think you should be in here, but," and all I'm thinking is getting out the exit door. And he said, I feel like a woman today. So the law says that I can be in here. I have every right to be in here. I feel like a woman. You have to respect that. I can't tell you how quickly I grabbed my clothes and ran. Now I spoke to I don't go kicking off to management, but I did have a light word with them, and I was actually shaking. Like it was frightening. And I'm thinking, oh my God. And so I spoke to the management, and they said, "Well, yeah, if he says he feels like a woman, he has every right to be in there." And so I just came away from there, quit my gym membership. I will never join a gym again. I won't. I work out at home and road running. But I did consult with some friends, lawyers, just to check what the actual law was. And I mean, he shouldn't have been in there, but it's got very messy now, and the Equality Act has been misinterpreted by many organisations. Stonewall have played a part in this, it would seem, from my research, but I don't know where we go with this now, because if someone says to you, "I feel like a woman today," most women will be and I'm a tough cookie, but most women will be inherently petrified. We know we can't, even if we have got legal rights, it's very hard in a changing room with a naked man in front of me to go back and forth over this and reclaim my space. That's where I realised some of this has gone too far, because I shouldn't have been put in that situation. He shouldn't have been in that changing room, and he wasn't trans. This was I'm just going to say it, a pervert who was going into a space that he now knows he can, and he knows management of most firms will say, "Well, if you feel like a woman, that's fine, you can do that." But I think we've got a very serious problem with that part, and this is where I think we keep seeing all these arguments and toxic debate around single sex spaces and how far is too far, and if somebody feels like a woman. What is your stance on all that, Debbie?
Well, that person should not have been there. And the issue is, yes, the people who are suffering are women.
Mm,
Women who have fought long and hard for spaces which they they can put some barriers around and say this is our space, and it's
Mm,
up to us who comes into this space. So your sex is suffering there. But
mm.
also that sort of anecdote doesn't do trans people any good
I
either.
know, I know. Well, that's
Uh,
what I was thinking. It's
where
causing
after
backlash.
gender reassignment surgery in 2016, I would probably have used the women's changing room, and you would not have had you wouldn't have had the same issue with me because my body doesn't look like a man's body anymore
Mm,
when I'm in that situation. Uh, in fact, you would have the more you see of my body, the less likely you are to clock me as male
mm,
because it doesn't look like a man's body. So that's where I would have been in 2016, and I would not have expected any issues as a result.
mm.
Now I won't use women's spaces
Really?
at all. I wouldn't use that change room. I don't use the toilets. And the key point is that I don't want to give that character license to come out and say, well, you let Debbie in. Why did you complain about me?
Mm,
So my retort to that person is I found the single-use cubicle because there will be some.
mm,
As a trans person, you can go to you go to the desk. There'll be some single-use changing cubicle, and if not, they'll let you change in a room somewhere else. This is what trans rights is all about. This is the extra rights which we campaign for. So if everybody went into that gym saying, "I don't want to change in a communal room. I want a private space,"
mm,
if they're set up with communal changing rooms, not all gyms are, but if they're set up with communal changing rooms, then it's just going to cause them such a headache. Whereas if every now and again a trans person such as myself comes in and asks for that, then they
mm.
generally cope with that.
Yeah,
So that's what I think is about trans rights.
yeah.
But so I wouldn't use that change room. You wouldn't see me in there
Mm,
simply because I just see I see the problems, and where do you draw the line? But secondly, I want that person. I want you to be able to say to that person, look, Debbie has gone through hormone therapy and gender reassignment surgery. Is not in here,
mm,
and if Debbie's not in here, you shouldn't be here either.
yeah.
And that's the situation where I think it's the only tenable situation as far as I'm concerned. But
I,
it is leading to such a backlash against trans people.
I know, and I mean, there's been an incident at a school in Essex, which you probably read about in the press. It was a few months ago, and they made their toilets gender neutral. And one of the boys sexually assaulted. Well, he's been arrested and charged with sexually assaulted some of his female classmates. And I'm thinking, why the hell did the school do that in the first place? The whole point of well, there was a reason we've got single sex spaces. And I just don't understand why sections of society have just freely given away girls, women's just. I mean, I don't get it. Of course,
Yeah.
those girls are at risk.
And in schools, there is specific legislation, the school premises England regulations, which actually specify, and it's one of the few places where it is specified. In most of society, it's custom and practice. You have men's and women's toilets, who
Mm,
uses which tends to be custom and practice, but not in schools. There is specific legislation for it. But schools have been ignoring this, and
yeah,
although there's two types of the unisex or gender neutral,
yeah,
whatever word you want to toilets. There are some which have been designed that way, and those are the ones with. And I've seen these
yeah.
in modern build schools where the cubicles are all floor to ceiling doors,
Mm,
and then they're unisex stalls, but then out there's a wash hand basin area with big open plan to the corridor, and they either sex they're not designated boys and girls. uh the original idea behind them, I think, was about supervision and duty teachers,
mm,
because those traditional school toilets can be a no-go area for teachers,
mm,
and that's that's been an issue there. So these open plan areas is the idea that teachers wandering down the corridor could wander down the corridor any time and
mm,
and keep an eye on what's going on. They're not legally compliant though, because of the hand wash areas. The legal compliance is the toilets should be totally self-contained.
Mm,
So within those stalls, there should be toilet, hand basin, hand dryer
mm,
in that space, and then it's compliant. So, but that's one thing. But the other thing is, schools have just been turning. Oh, sorry, going back. What was interesting? The new build school I went into, and this is a few years ago. This is 10 or more years ago, when it was pointed out that all the toilets were gender neutral, but the girls had staked the claim on this one, and the boys all went to the one upstairs. So 12, 13-year-old children uh, presented with all these gender neutral toilets got into a position where the girls collared that one and the boys would go nowhere near, and similar the other way around. You can see how that happens. But what's been going wrong is that those traditional toilets with the door on, so you can't see what's going on there, they've been
yeah,
turned into unisex areas and still retain the almost the no-go area as far as the teacher's concerned. Teachers
yeah,
don't like going in there, so it's just awful, and I
yeah.
think it's wrong.
I mean, I see some people have argued online and said, well, you can go stop at a cafe and they'll only have one toilet, but that's one toilet with a locked door.
Yeah.
You know,
And
that's
and the hand basin and the hand dryer is inside
yeah,
there.
yeah,
Yeah, there are some chains which have those. Even if they've got 3 or 4 toilets, they'll be self-contained.
yeah,
Actually, I know which ones have them, and those are the chains which I use because it's easier for me.
yeah.
Although I'm aware that not all women like them because uh, men don't tend to keep them necessarily as clean. So and splash all over the place. I'm aware that there's my view on those. If you've got a bank of 4 toilets, then designate one reserved for women and one for men if men want some equality on that, and the other two can be. Otherwise, you can end up in a position where women end up queuing for their toilets while the men are just going in and out without a
Yeah.
queue, which happens as well.
That always happens at a PA event, given that we're highly populated by
Yeah, yeah. But
women.
what you do then is you just redesignate one of the men's. If you're at a PA event, just redesignate one of the men's toilets as women's toilets and
Yeah,
colonize them. That's what you can do in that situation. I
yeah,
think
and
Helen's just put something
yeah,
in the
chat,
chat there
yeah.
about feeling confident enough to challenge someone. I think Helen, I think you should challenge somebody, but challenge somebody, if you're just saying I do not think you should be here, and if they come back and say, well, I think I should, then it's as Victoria did, and take it to the management and say I don't think this, and then leave it with the management. If enough people do that,
Then it
then
was going to have to.
things may change.
I mean, we've
Uh,
got cases going through now. There's the Darlington NHS or a hospital, an NHS trust in that area. And the nurses. Have you seen that case, Debbie, where they've taken a case
yes, yeah,
against their employer because HR said they have to share their changing room. So I believe this person is transitioning, but they've held off having the surgery because they're trying to get their partner pregnant.
right,
And what they've said is we shouldn't be in a changing room with somebody who's got male
yeah,
genitalia, and HR's basically told them to pipe down, and even put a notice on the front of the women's changing room saying fully inclusive, blah blah blah. But they I think they were suspended, and they've now taken this case
yeah,
against.
and they need to,
Yeah,
yeah. I'm just think it, you know,
it's bonkers
yeah,
because
this this
they
this
shouldn't
is
have been
crazy,
letting
and
that.
you shouldn't be doing this. It's like something out of Monty Python,
Yeah.
where this is absurd, and it's getting to the levels of absurdity. Whereas one way of dealing with it is to have a quiet word with the men who have probably got their changing room and
Mm,
saying, "We don't feel comfortable in our changing room. Can we please use yours between 8:30 and 9, and
mm.
between these sort of times?" And my guess is men would probably say yes. We will, and yeah, yeah, but it's that it's it shouldn't be like this. We shouldn't be in this. It
No,
is it is an absurdity because we are
yeah,
trying to deny what I've come to understand as human instinct. These are not some subconscious biases, as we call them. This is an evolved human instinct in us all. We
mm,
can all tell the difference between the two sexes.
mm,
Since the dawn of time, we've been able to do that. And
yeah,
we have different feelings when we're in the company of each sex.
yeah,
And we can't do anything about that because in the same way, we can't do anything about the feeling of hunger or the
mm,
feeling of thirst. These are things that have evolved into us for our own good. If we didn't feel hungry, we'd probably end up starving. And if we didn't feel differently in the company of men and women, then we'd probably not have kept ourselves safe in history to get us to where we are now.
yeah.
So, these are real human instincts here. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to deny that. And it's just a nonsense. We can't and we
I
shouldn't
think
be.
I think it's damaging for, real transgender people because it's a huge thing to go through in your life and come to that acceptance. And I've got a lot of trans friends. I have done since I was a teenager. I think some of the activism now, it is just, I mean, a lot of women and a number of PAs have said to me they are petrified to put anything out in public, even talking at with some of, the fact that no, I don't want to be in a changing room
Yeah.
with somebody who's got a penis. I don't want to be. And I'm not being transphobic. I'm not giving you hate. I'm trying to protect myself. And they might get back when I've seen people who have been brave enough or stupid enough to say this online, it gets, they get, well, trans people are not perverts. That's not the point. It's not the point of that. These single sex spaces were put to there for a reason. Um, and so it is, I think the sadness of it is how many legal cases are going on at the moment. So, I mean, it's as bonkers as a football club who basically terminated one of their season ticket holders. She's a lesbian woman because of some stuff she said on X
Oh,
that
that was Newcastle United. That's my
was it
team.
you?
Yeah,
Was that your team?
that's
And
my
I just
team. Yeah, so I followed that. Yeah,
I was like, well, I don't. The case hasn't
yeah.
gone to court yet, has it? I
Yeah,
think they're.
it's crazy. It's we
But what the
should
hell's
be.
that got to do
Yeah,
with?
and that's saying something on Facebook or Twitter or something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
Yeah,
something.
no, these are political forums where we should be able to express our ideas and advance our arguments. Yeah,
Being
it's
policed by
it
a football club that you love, that you've
yeah
spent
yeah
money as a season ticket holder. Crazy.
it's crazy. I think though what's going on that there seems to be an increasing entrenchment into two positions,
Mm,
and I've been on a journey through those two positions, and I to be honest, I think they're both wrong.
yeah,
So when I actually transitioned, the goal was to be taken as the opposite sex, so
yeah,
it wouldn't actually be noticed. That's why we went through gender reassignment surgery and thing. So if I was in those changing rooms, you wouldn't the surgery is very good. You wouldn't you
yeah.
wouldn't you wouldn't suspect. So that was the idea. But after I transitioned, I did buy into this position, which is shared by trans activists.
Mm,
Uh, is that I was really a woman because I had some female essence, or I felt like a woman, to use
mm,
that comment which she's used before. I felt like a woman. I had a female gender identity, so this made me really a woman.
mm,
And taking that to its extreme, you don't have to do anything about it. You
mm,
don't have to take hormone therapy. You don't have to have surgery. You don't have to grow your hair out. You don't have to change your clothes. You simply have to say, I feel like a woman. And
mm,
you inherit all the rights of women. Now, if that's not going to, you said about trans people not being perverts, but
mm.
if that's not going to attract every man who wants to circumvent
Yes,
all the gatekeeping which has been known to women, then it's gonna attract them. It's gonna attract them like what attracts flies.
yeah.
It's just gonna happen, and women are gonna lose their rights, and trans people are gonna get brought into disrepute.
I know.
So that's that. But I did hold that for a while because I didn't think it would get to the absurd level that it did.
Well, I mean, I think when you see, I mean, Isla Bryson, I mean, come on. Anyone with half a brain could see this is a serial rapist. Of course he transitioned. He wanted to go into the
Yeah,
place. Commit more
Which
crime.
rapist wouldn't?
I mean,
So that position I think is absurd. Just to use the word, I think that's absurd.
yeah, yeah.
And I just don't think we should have ever gone there.
Well,
But the backlash to that has been what I call the adult human female position,
mm,
which a woman is an adult human female, and you have to be born as a woman with XX chromosomes, and and to be and to grow up in that way, and then you're a woman, and that's the rules. That's the rules there. And I went along. I accepted that situation. I'm a science teacher, so I accepted that situation. So by that token, I'm a man, and which works well enough online. People refer to me as a man. That it doesn't. What's our sex really matter online?
mm,
But it wouldn't work very well for me at work to be using the men's toilets and men's changing rooms, because
mm,
I don't look like a man. So
yeah,
inevitably, it doesn't really work.
no.
Uh, also, at school, if I'm sat in the staff room and somebody comes in, and a visitor comes into school, is looking for me, and I'm sat over by the bookcase, and I'm pointing out, oh Debbie, he's the man with the grey hair sat over by the bookcase. Then it's going to have the reaction, who? Whereas if they say, oh Debbie, she's sat over there by the bookcase, can you see it? Then it makes sense, so it's intelligible. So I've come to the conclusion that I'm not sure that's right either. But if we go back to the beginning, there's this idea of fitting in, and
Mm,
I've come to the realization that what matters is how we perceive other human beings.
mm,
So one side of this debate says a woman is anybody who identifies as a woman,
mm-hmm,
but what they mean is, I think a woman ought to mean anybody who identifies as a woman. That's what I think they're saying. And
mm,
on the other side, what I think they're saying is, I think a woman ought to mean adult human female. And if I'm honest, I think it ought to mean that as well, because that there's that I understand that. I think it ought to mean that, but that's not what people mean when they use the terminology. When
mm,
people use the term woman, they refer to that perception of somebody they understand to be a woman,
mm,
and perceive to be a woman. Because let's face it, we've been using these terms man and woman for hundreds of years, and similar words for since we developed language, probably.
right.
And I've actually heard that there's in various animal species, that the animals will have got different calls, or make different noises when they're referring to the male and female of their own kind.
Mm,
So it seems that animals know the difference between male and female as well, and
yeah.
that's what's important. And that's the issue. Now, I think it needs to be moderated. I think we need rules and safeguards in position,
Mm,
in position. But that's why I don't think we're getting any resolution here, because we need to understand, what do people mean when they use the terms. And
mm,
if somebody perceives me to be a woman, then to them I'm a woman. And if they perceive me to be a man, then I'm a man. And am I a man or am I a woman? Well, it depends on how I'm perceived. But what I've worked out is, you can't be perceived to be a man and a woman at the same time. Sorry, I'm getting lost in this, but
yeah, yeah. I
I
get where you're going.
I have, there's a political dispute going on here, and I think to resolve it, we have to understand what people mean when they use the language, rather than what we think they ought to mean, which is something
Mm.
different.
I think one of the sad things for me, as a woman, is erasure of the word woman. And it is happening. I mean, I saw a commentator on this morning, a couple of months ago now, and she said this isn't happening. It's all alike, but it actually is. I mean, if you look at the NHS and their guidance on chest feeding and birthing person, I mean, I've got a lot of sisters. I'm the oldest of seven girls. A lot of females in my family, but many of them are nurses. So I know what's going on in the NHS, and they've told me. And I've got a lot of friends who work there as well. And I actually spoke to my trans friends about this, because obviously this sort of stuff that's going on now, and the chest feeding and birthing person and person going through the menopause. This is new, quite new stuff. It's only been coming in, hasn't it, over the last a bit more than a few years. But I was talking to my trans friends, and they said, "But we never asked for this. No, it doesn't bother us because we'll say obviously to our GP, well, we've transitioned to become a woman, and they would and that doctor, and then obviously if they have to go to hospital, that doctor will just adjust, or nurses will just adjust the language accordingly,
Yeah.
to make them feel comfortable. I don't understand why we've had to do blanket, um, changing words. I don't understand why we've gone, and it does upset a lot of women actually, but they're too frightened to say anything about it.
It's interesting. It tends to work one way, isn't it? The
Yeah,
classic situation is when the leaflet for cervical cancer talked about people with
yeah,
cervix disease,
I
but the one
know.
for prostate cancer was men,
Yeah,
and it
it's
didn't work both ways. I I'm going to be provocative here, and
yeah.
I wonder whether it's the sex of the people who are making these decisions. And men can sometimes, male-dominated industries can sometimes be have a problem about aggression is left unchecked.
Hmm.
And female-dominated professions, it's where compassion can be unchecked. And this idea of wanting to be nice, women are quite happy to give up their own rights. They wouldn't take the rights. We won't change the men's leaflet because that'd be
Mm.
taking the rights away from men. But we're quite happy to give up our own rights.
And I was going to
And
say
I
some of
don't.
this has
Yeah,
been led, some of this change has actually been led by women.
yeah.
I mean, some of them are prominent feminists.
Well, the other thing is where it's happened in law.
Yeah,
The closest we got in the UK as a whole to self-identification of legal gender coming in was under Theresa May, who made a pledge at the Pink News dinner or something. Goodness, what she was
mm,
doing there, I don't know. A Pink News sponsored dinner about bringing in self-ID. Scotland, it happened under Nicola Sturgeon. In New Zealand was a country that went through this under Jacinda Ardern.
yeah,
In Australia, you mentioned that that case there about the Sal
yeah,
Grover and case about Tickle versus Giggle, and
yeah.
that came on. The law got changed in Australia when Julia, I forget her second name now,
So,
but
yeah,
a female prime minister was in charge.
I
And
know.
it's almost as if, and I'm consciously sex the people in the room here,
Mm,
it's almost as if women will, out of compassion, give away their own rights, whereas men have got a better understanding of what men are like. And even the
yeah,
men who were men who aren't identifying as men anymore, we've got
mm,
a better idea of who these people are, and we need to keep some safeguards in place.
yeah. I mean, I made an innocent comment on one of the social media sites some months ago. It was all women that piled on me. All women. No, not trans women, women. Be kind and all this. And I'm like, it's not it. The thing is, I've been in the trenches with the LGBTQ community. That I'm not somebody that's just popped up now as an ally. I had a gay dad who was HIV. I was out there doing the Pride marches, as I've said, and campaigning for Stonewall. Um, I've done a lot, and I will always do a lot and defend the rights of these communities. But to be jumped on just for making an innocent comment,
Yeah.
but some people are really good online as well. I mean, there was a whole debate on X about the rainbow lanyards, and should NHS staff be wearing them? And I said, I'm asking genuinely here, how, but because I never spoke it. My dad died just before the pandemic, but I didn't ever speak to him about the rainbow um, lanyards or anything like that. We were campaigning for, much bigger things, frankly, at the time. But somebody did take the time to explain it to me, and it said it made them feel safe as a trans person with that member of staff. And this trans woman said they haven't always had great treatment and care being a trans person in the NHS, and that they've come across transphobic nurses and doctors, and comments have been made. And so if someone's wearing that rainbow lanyard, then they know they're safe. And I've got that, and that's fine. And I was like, thank you very much. But there was like arguments going on about the rainbow lanyard as well.
Well,
And I
but
was like,
it works both ways, does that?
yeah,
I've been quite outspoken against some of the recent demands of the
I know.
LGBTQ community,
And
and it's people who wear those rainbow lanyards have given me more jip than anybody else.
I mean, you've had
So
actual death threats, haven't you? I mean,
yes, but nothing I've necessarily taken. Not to the point where I've called the police around
yeah,
to check my security. But it's not nice to get. It's not nice to get
no,
them the whole same thing. I've just noticed Elizabeth put something in the chat here about yeah,
yeah,
I think going back, Elizabeth, to what you're saying is that you're supportive. And going back, my rule is that assume people are working with the best of intentions until you hear otherwise. And most people, I don't require people to wear those rainbow lanyards. In actual fact, it's sometimes just I get cautious about it because I'm thinking, is this going to be somebody who is getting political about
mm,
the campaign? Because we've moved beyond the inclusion of gay and lesbian people in society. It's just unremarkable, gay and lesbian
mm,
people now. And also trans people have, we had the rights that we needed. We had the right to transition and not be clapped in irons for transitioning, which did happen. You could have been arrested 20 years ago for behavior like to cause a breach of the peace.
mm,
So we got those rights. But the two recent campaigns, which I am sure are cautious at best. No, I disagree with. One is the absolute right to identify our legal sex, so that so that anybody can say, "I feel like a woman, therefore the law's got to treat me as a woman."
mm,
I think that's a nonsense, and I think it's led to all sorts of problems. But the other one is the impact on children, who I think are pawns in a political dispute, and this should never ever have happened. We should never have been experimenting as we have done on children. And what that rainbow badge can often now mean is, I I support. I support the medicalization of children who are confused about their sex or unhappy about going through puberty, which
mm.
so I react against that, and that sadly is a key campaign which is, I think, misguided.
Well, I
Um,
I will say this, Debbie. From I used to work near the Tavistock clinic that's now been shut down. I worked near there for 7.5 years. Used to go for walks to, burn the fat, as they say, with my colleagues, and we got chatting to people. We're just about to go in or coming out. I was quite shocked at the revelations from that clinic, and obviously reading stories like Cara Bell. I can't help but think that the NHS has got a ton of lawsuits coming their way. I mean, they will. If it's, I think there may be some starting now. But then, this somebody in my area who is desperately sad. They've been on this wait list with the NHS for years and years and years, and it's causing mental health problems because it's stopping them being the person they're meant to be. And I don't, I don't know where we go with all this because the CAS report, it's come out. There's been all these things implemented, but there's so much climb back. I mean, even American doctors are getting involved now, saying you're wrong in the UK. And as you say, there's often kids, and it's a lot of the current statistics say it's mostly girls that are trying to transition into men,
yeah,
which I
and
think.
it's a different. I go back to what I said about that demographic of men between 35
Mm,
and 75. Uh, the demographic now is totally different. It's young people, and
mm,
and the bias is to the other sex. This has never happened before.
mm,
So there's never been a majority of young women who are wanting to transition as opposed to middle-aged men. So you've got to ask what's going on here.
yeah.
And the assumption's been made is that both this group of middle-aged men and these young women are suffering from the same conditions, so they're treated in the same clinics, which is it's ludicrous. There is no justification for that apart from these are two groups that want to change their sex. But
Mm,
there's two groups can share lots of symptoms, but you don't treat them all the same. Like, there's lots of reasons for having a headache, but you don't treat every case of headache in the same way.
mm,
But that's what we've done here. This distress over our sex has all been treated in the same way because it's been assumed to be the same condition. And
yeah.
the youngsters are are a different group.
Mm,
And my question is, there's two things about what went on at the Tavistock. One, that they did get some research through which said that the treatment that they were supplying, the blocking puberty and blocking puberty, was not actually improving mental functioning. So these were distressed and distressed children who remained distressed children. Their mental health didn't improve. So
Mm,
if the treatment's not working, then for goodness sake, you don't do it. First
mm,
do no harm. And secondly, the to the question, why now? Why all these people suddenly coming out? The retort was, well, uh, in previous generations, they just couldn't. So it's only because now they can do, uh, only because they can, they are doing. But at the same point, the group of older people remain men. There wasn't a group of middle-aged women who were suddenly saying, ah, now I can come out and transition.
mm,
There were tiny numbers, as they've always been before. But what was there was middle-aged women who said that when they went through puberty, they really struggled with their sex, and
yeah.
they struggled with the idea of growing up to be a woman because it was cutting down lots of things, opportunities for them, and they were struggling with the idea. But by going through puberty, they reconciled themselves to their sex,
Mm,
and so now that group, a generation or two younger, we're now taking away that if puberty was actually the cure to this distress, we've been taking away the cure and imposing on them something which doesn't work.
yeah.
And it just beggars belief that people are still holding to this, that the BMA, the activists within the British Medical Association are are coming out, are putting motions before their conference on these lines. It really is. It could be, I'm a journalist, so I care for the language I use.
Mm,
It could be described as criminal. It really could.
mm. I think when you look at women, teenage girls in particular, I've got a lot of nieces. There's something going on right now. I mean, I saw my nieces last year, and she's 16 now, but she was 15 at the time, and honestly, the things she wanted to do to herself to change the way she looked. I mean, there's so much. I know there's a lot of pressure on boys as well, and it's a lot of it's to do with social media. And some prominent feminists would say, well, that's what equality is. We've given them the right. You can do what the hell you want. Um, but she, fake eyebrows and fake tan and fake. I mean, I know a lot of grown-up women do this as well and stuff, but she was like, "Oh, and I want a breast job, and I want to get this and lipo," and I'm just, you're 15. Like, I think something's going wrong in society. That I mean, we got told off at school just for wearing a little bit of lipstick. I mean, Mr. Francis, my form teacher, used to come up with a bit of tissue and go, "Get that off now." And actually, I'm glad I was in that generation, because the pressure now on young people, and then they're constantly questioning themselves and, do I fit in? And I just don't think we, as many of us, had to think about all that back then.
Yeah, peer pressure is the same as it's always been, but it goes on
Mm,
all the time now,
yeah,
because you're never detached from your peer group in the way that we used to be.
yeah,
So that I used to go home from school, and unless you actually went round to somebody else's house or you called them on the phone, we didn't tend to do that. You were
mm,
detached from your peer group. Whereas now that goes on the whole time, even during children may be exchanging messages with friends during family meal times, for example.
yeah,
Whereas that's new, and we haven't got a way of dealing with this at all. So this is new, and as a society, we're still working out how to deal with this. And as human beings, we crave society, we crave
mm,
our peer group, and looking good in front of our peer group and impressing
yeah,
our peer group. These are things we want to do, and now we're able to do this the whole time.
yeah,
But we didn't really evolve for this, and perhaps how in previous generations that other things which we've been able to do have been then restricted after a while. Perhaps social media will need to be restricted in the same way. It really does have a impact on the brain and releasing chemicals in the brain that so do so can certain mood enhancing drugs can as well.
Yeah.
So
It
when
does. Yeah. It does feel like we're in this sort of utopia at the moment, in a way, with, there's lots going on with different sections of society, and actually, if you connect all the dots, a lot of it is back to social media.
yeah,
Because
you know
you've got influences for absolutely everything now.
Yeah. When I was growing up, cigarettes was something which were frowned upon, but it
Mm,
was children used to smoke, and it wasn't illegal for children to buy cigarettes. When I was growing up, it wasn't illegal for children to buy cigarettes. It was
mm,
only illegal to sell cigarettes to somebody under the age of 16. That was
yeah,
the law was. Whereas now it's these, and even though we knew it was harmful, it was didn't really pay much attention to it. Whereas now the law is much stricter on that.
mm,
And going back to Victorian times when opiates were used, some people were using those sort of drugs, and it happened. But it was after a while we realised that individuals need protecting from themselves, and perhaps that the social media has been described as opium for the brain in some ways, in that it just takes over and becomes so addictive, and
yeah,
perhaps we may need restrictions to protect people from themselves there, and especially young people.
yeah,
But we need to work that through. It's people's freedom as individuals, but also as a group, we need to keep each other safe,
mm,
and it's holding that in balance. And I don't think we have it right over social media at the moment.
no. And talking about social media, and actually, back to the transgender debate. I'll probably lose some members for saying this, but I'm really fed up with having to be quiet about it now. I don't like the term cis women. Um, and I know I mentioned this very briefly before we came on, and I said I would bring it up. A lot of women I speak to don't like it either, but they'll never ever say it publicly. Again, they're absolutely petrified. And I have had debates online with people. I don't want to be called a cis woman. I'm just a woman. Uh, that's it. And they're like, but what does it matter to you? Um, why? And to me, I, I don't see why we need to put something in front of women. And I'll get all this will be kind, be respectful. I'm not being disrespectful to other people. I just don't want to be called a cis woman. And one of the ways I come at it, from my life's been in the national press, and I spent my childhood being, and I'm sorry to if any of you didn't know this about me and anyone listening, but it has been out there publicly. I was sexually abused my entire childhood, and I escaped at 16. And I didn't have girlhood. I lost all that, and so becoming a woman, that was me reclaiming my life back, um, getting freedom. And so actually, womanhood is really important to me. I worked hard as an adult, to get the life I wanted. And I just don't understand why we've got all these subsections of things and labels. And I guess, not everybody will agree with me, and that's absolutely fine. If someone wants me to call them a cis woman, I'm happy to. And again, it's with the pronouns. I don't have pronouns on my signature or LinkedIn profile anymore, but I'm absolutely happy to respect someone else's pronouns, 100%. Um, but yeah, you can get piled on a bit for saying that because apparently you're not being kind. But I just, I've got very specific reasons why I just want to be called a woman. But I think women just generally, why we're women, women. I don't get it, Debbie. I don't understand why.
Yeah, it's not a term I would ever use as cis woman for anybody. Uh, but it's actually meaningless. It's a meaningless label actually, because the aim for trans women or male transsexuals is probably a better term for us,
Mm,
is that the idea was we wanted to be we want to pass as women, we want to be taken for women, we want to be perceived as women. That's the instinct within us. If women as a group said, okay, then we're going to give up this label woman, it's lost, but
mm,
we are going to take this word cis woman for ourselves, and boy, this is where we're all going to adopt this word cis woman, and we're going to keep this for ourselves. You dare bet we'd have trans cis women, and you'd then be cis women. It wouldn't, it, you know, it, it's it wouldn't work. So so I think it's a meaningless, and it's a meaningless term. It's trying to redefine something what we already understand. We know what a
Mm,
woman is, and if we redefine the word woman to cis woman, then cis women will have to include trans women as well, because trans women want to be perceived as women.
yeah.
So we end up going round and round in circles and get nowhere.
Well, I
So
know
it's
that,
pointless.
and that's why I never understood it. Because if a trans woman's telling me you're a woman, why are you saying trans women?
Yeah, and
It
yeah,
doesn't
yeah. It's so
it doesn't make any
I
sense.
don't, I don't care. I don't use the word cis woman. I don't care for trans women either. I use it because it's intelligible. People know what it means, but
Yeah,
I don't care for it. But going back to what you said about the pronouns, I don't
yeah.
put any pronouns in my signature at all. I don't put any pronouns on a badge. If I'm presented with a badge, sometimes badge with pronouns on, I'll either leave them blank if I can, or if somebody decides for me, I'll actually cover them up.
Mm,
I don't like them. I think it's imposing something on other people, and it should be the decision that other people make. And if I'm pressed on this, I give examples of when I was once in a business meeting. I've written about this. So I was once in a business meeting, and it starts off, and my name is Alan, and my pronouns are he, him. And then comes I, I'm Betty, I'm she, her. I'm Colin, I'm he, him. And I said, I'm Debbie, and I'm not sharing any pronouns. Now it sort of you could it cut through that meeting like it was like
sorry.
dropping a bomb in that meeting. And then and in the silence, I said, look, I said, I don't know if you're doing this for me, because I think they clocked me as trans in that situation,
Mm,
or you do it anyway. I don't know, but it's not helpful. I could say she, her, and let it go, and let go and remarked. But if this had happened, if I'd been sat here in the first 44 years of my life, then I'd have had to say he, him, which was exacerbating my feelings of distress about myself and negative feelings about myself. Or I would have outed myself there and then in a business meeting before I'd even told my family. So what was I expected to do?
mm,
So I said, just in case there is somebody else around this table who is struggling with gender and doesn't want to come out at this time, I'm going to help them by not sharing my pronouns, so they don't need to share their pronouns either.
mm.
And
It's a really good point.
but nobody had thought. So we sort of ummed and ahed about that, and then we got back to the agenda. But nobody thinks about that. It's just one of these trite, people mean well by it, but the impact, especially on trans people still in the closet, can be, it just can be so profound, and nobody, these pronoun circles, as I call them, they're there for people to show how good they are. Virtue. They're to signal their virtue. They don't help the trans people, not
Yeah.
really.
No, I mean, as I say, if someone wants me to call them whatever, I'm happy to respect that. And if that makes them feel good and happy and content and safe, I'll absolutely do that. I just want people to respect that I don't want to use that. I don't, it is what it is, and I don't want to keep getting in all these subsections of things for me personally, but happy to respect other people, and I do, and always will. And talking about trans people still in the closet, um, I in one of my previous jobs, I was in a charity as a PA, and a colleague did confide in me that they were in the closet and transitioned to become a woman, but didn't want to tell anyone else in the organisation, and eventually they did, and it was slow. But I was just a sort of safe person in work they could chat to, and I they didn't have she didn't have a lot of support at home from family, so I was just a trusted confidant, I think. But how can we help colleagues who are coming out, making that transition and later in life and at work? And are there any sort of top tips from you, Debbie, that we can immediately do outside of pronouns and
I think when it comes to pronouns, yeah, it's my advice is always say what you see. If you perceive this person to be a woman, then use she, her, and if you perceive this person to be a man, use he, him,
mm,
and that's intelligible to other people. That's the message. That's the message you're getting.
mm,
You're putting across. Practically, I think it's not judging, and for most of what we do at work, it's our sex doesn't matter. I'm a
mm,
teacher. I do exactly the same job now as I did before I transitioned, and I do exactly the same job as my male colleagues and my female colleagues, and it's to try and take sex out of being an issue.
mm,
Now, yeah, it's so there's a lack of I can't I won't say it'd be non-judgmental. We all judge
mm,
everybody else. It's what we do as people. But to try and remove from that everything that can be removed from it. So yeah, we're discussing the way in which we're going to develop this scheme of work, or we putting items for this agenda together. There's a job to do, and whether people are men, women, identify as men, women, it should make no difference at all.
mm,
In terms of facilities, I think not everybody wants to share communal facilities with their own sex. And I think this
mm,
is the thing I've learned, and this if there's one campaign I'd really like to do is this. And I think we'd be in a better place in society if there was a mixture of provision in in workplaces.
mm,
So if there's a women's space and a men's space, let's have mixed spaces as well. Now you wouldn't have a mixed open plan changing room, but you can have some
mm,
cubicles. You can do that. At work in my previous school, before I transitioned, we had the men's toilets and the women's traditional toilets, and around the school we had some unisex cubicles because for teachers because you couldn't run across the school to the toilet, and they tend to come in pairs with M and F. And as I said before, the women tended to end up queuing outside one, and the men ended up flitting in and out the other. So there were changed before I transitioned or I came out at school to be unisex, and that worked. There was occasional complaints in staff meetings from the men asking, from the women asking the men to put the seat back down and make sure it's wiped. That's that sort of thing, which wasn't happening. But that aside, it tended to work. Did that? And that I think is the way forwards.
mm,
And we can do better across society as a whole, where we've got men's toilets and women's toilets. Uh, there's often an accessible toilet as well, but there's also likely my experience of both using both toilets. My experience is that the cubicles in the women's toilets are generally high capacity, the high demand on those. In the men's toilets, there's probably one cubicle fewer, or even the same number, which
mm,
hardly ever get used. Nobody uses them. Hardly ever get used. And meanwhile, there's women queuing up for the other ones next door. I do think the way in which we organise toilets is crazy. And have a men's toilets with some urinals and a hand basin, have the women's toilets as is now. Don't touch that one. And the space where you got the men's cubicles, have those as unisex. Have those as
mm,
unisex cubicles open to the corridor. And that would be a better use of space. Men still have got access to the cubicles if they need them. Women have got access to a bigger number of cubicles. They
mm,
retain their own, which the men don't use, but they can use the. You see what I mean? This
yeah,
seems like common sense to me, but it's it comes back to something which was drilled into me when I was a trainee teacher nearly 30 years ago, was that when we're looking at equal opportunities and when we're looking at diversity, we did talk a little bit in those days,
mm,
was that the key test of good practice was good practice is good practice for all. And if it's not good practice for all,
yeah,
then it's not good practice and we need to do better.
yeah,
And it is that sort of thing. So when you're including trans people, then it's not good practice if the way in which you include them excludes other people. So, for example, women are just not using the changing rooms because they feel excluded from their own changing rooms.
mm,
That's not good practice.
no,
So don't do it. So that's the test I'd always say. Is this good practice for everybody? And if it's simply saying to somebody, I understand you're going through a transition. It makes no difference to me whether you come to work dressed in trousers or a skirt. I really don't mind at all. And if you're wearing something that suits, I'll compliment on you on your appearance like I compliment anybody else on their appearance.
Mm.
That I think is good practice, but not to say I'm going to you're transitioning, therefore your every wish is my command, which seems to be I'll probably lose. I've a few friends to lose in this debate, but if I'm being cynical, that's what seems to come across, and I just don't think it's helpful.
No, I think some of the activism, at least, has been quite damaging. And actually, more broadly, I've always, as I say, I've always been involved in EDI through my work. And there is now a backlash to EDI more broadly. I mean, it's not just the transgender debate, it's across the board. I mean, another American retailer yesterday said that due to the backlash about their woke policies, they were dropping all sorts of stuff and they're not getting involved in the local pride parade or something, they were saying yesterday. And um the I think it's sad. I think some of it's been caused by some of the activism under the EDI umbrella. And it's sad because we've still got so much work to do in some of those areas. And
Yeah,
I just yeah, I mean it is, there is a backlash.
I think those three letters EDI on the I'd say who are you including and why are you including them? And I think we
Mm,
need an honest discussion on this. But when you come to inclusion, what are you including?
mm,
Are there things that we should exclude? And I think
mm,
there should be, but we need to have that discussion on what's included there
yeah.
because there are things which
Well,
shouldn't
people
be.
are calling it die now, aren't they? I mean, on
Yeah,
X they call it D, or in America
yeah,
they're now
yeah,
calling it DIE.
yeah.
Elon
S-
Musk does. I just it
mm,
Yeah, and it is sad because a
yeah,
lot of good work's been done, but the good, unfortunately, some of the activism out there, I don't even know how to describe it,
mm,
but it's eradicating some of the good and really important work that's
yeah.
been done.
Yeah. And then there's the D about the diversity. How diverse are you really? That's my question there. Do you allow diversity of opinion among the diversity?
Mm,
Or
mm,
diversity of learning style, that sort of thing, or personality type?
mm,
I'm an introverted, organized, logical thinker who likes to get everything tidied up in this line. Now, that's
yeah.
me. And in certain organizations, we've sort of taken over. And if you've not got your diary color coded through to 3 months hence, then heaven help you. And other areas seem to be diversity is it just means going no further than those who go from one idea to another with blue sky thinking.
Yeah.
And the other one is the equality of what? Is this equality of opportunity or is this equality of outcome?
Mm,
And I think there is a debate to be had there because we don't have it. We assume that it's equality of opportunity, which I think is important,
yeah.
but equality of outcome, I don't think necessarily is because some people are better at things than others.
Yeah.
And what we really want to be doing is steering people to what they're good at in an organization
Mm,
rather than having a equality of outcome for each individual group in different areas. And there are areas where men and women tend to have their biases as well. Your profession is 96% female, mine's 75% female.
mm,
Others are uh, others are 96% male. Should we
mm,
be pushing for equality of outcome so that in your line of work 50% are male and 50% are female? Well, we
mm.
could try that, but we'd end up
We'd never achieve it. I mean,
you didn't achieve anything.
no, I started a campaign actually, which I got lambasted for at the time. And it was tongue in cheek called the Not Just a Girl's Job. And we were trying to attract more men into the profession. And I was very clear back then, I wasn't going to try and achieve a 50-50. That may happen, but it will take decades. I
Mm,
mean, it will take decades and decades. And I was hoping, well, if we can even get to 90-10 split, that's an achievement. And people, somebody said to me the other day, we still don't have as many men. And I said, but that we never were going to be 50-50. It never will be. And it's funny, Debbie, because for such a female oriented profession, we don't talk about any like women's rights necessarily. We did one of these chats with Harvey Weinstein's former PA, who brought about the whole opened up. She was one of the first people to open up. So we've talked about stuff like that, but we don't talk about anything to do with women, really. I think the only thing we've touched upon in our industry is the menopause, which is great, and we
Yeah.
needed to talk more about that. But it did struck me the other day, and I was like, wow, we don't. It's such a female-dominated profession. We just don't talk about anything women-related, as such. I mean, there was a
Yeah.
job title debate last week raging online about our profession, Debbie, and there was a real difference in opinion just with the men and women. And there weren't arguments, but there was some kind of, well, you have a different time as a PA or EA because you're a man. Your experience is different to mine as a woman because I'm an EA, and then I've got to deal with all the stuff that women have to do in the workplace as well. And so, yeah, there's all this sort of stuff going on just around job titles at the moment. Interesting. I don't know where it will go, but
Yeah, I think it's the important thing is equality of opportunity,
yeah,
and
yeah,
that's what matters.
yeah,
And as long as men, there isn't the barriers into for men doing this, then accepting that, yeah, there is a bias between the sexes in terms of interests and preferences, and that Carl Jung noticed that.
yeah.
So so be accept that. In teaching, it's primary school teaching. It's how schools are often desperate for a man to be on the staff in a primary school because
Oh, wow.
the primary schools, the children are 50-50 in terms of sex ratios, but some primary schools have got no men on the staff, and
Mm,
that's not necessarily good for children of either sex. So again, but we wouldn't. I don't think we'd ever in a position where 50% of primary school teachers are men. That's not going to
mm,
happen.
mm.
The sexes are different. Another anecdote from when I was a student, the speech therapists and the mechanical engineers uh, noticed that their sex ratios were different. The speech therapists were one, the mechanical engineers are the other, and it was a student Christmas party, and they decided to have a joint Christmas party to get.
Oh, wow.
So they had this. So they got really the social secretaries got really excited about this, about having this joint, and they'll have a mix of 50-50. But what ended up happening was, uh, all the male mech eng students ended up dancing around the bar. Ended up standing around the bar, and the female speech therapists were dancing on the dance floor around their handbags, and the two male speech therapists and the five female mechanical engineers sort of felt just as out of place there. I think they found common purpose with each other actually, than they did anyway. So
Yeah,
it was just interesting how it wasn't just the sexes, but it was there were just two different worldviews. These.
yeah, yeah. Now, I know we're coming to the end now, so I wanted to ask you about your book and
Yeah.
if you can tell us a little bit about that because it's an incredibly moving book. Well, I felt.
Yeah, I've been a teacher for 20 odd years. I started teaching in 96 actually. So I've been a teacher a long time. I transitioned in 2012 and then got increasingly into transgender activism as it's called. And then when I thought that self-ID was not a good idea, I started being honest about what I thought. And I was then became a rather unusual person. I was a transsexual who didn't agree with self-identification, was cautious about children transitioning, and had different opinions to everybody else. So everybody else in the trans community, or so it seemed,
Mm,
or I had different opinions to everybody else who was willing to speak out. So I found editors keen to publish what I had to say. I mentioned before I'm a trade union rep. I was a senior activist at the time as well. So I was in a position where I was sitting on TUC committees
mm,
as a transitioned person. So from there, editors were wanting to an editor wants to publish different opinions naturally. I was quite keen to publish my opinion because it was quite interesting. So I started writing for the Morning Star first. It's a newspaper of the trade union movement. So my first piece is the Morning Star. Then the Times noticed that I was writing for the Morning Star. So can you write a piece for the Times? I once wrote for the Times and the Morning Star on the same day.
Oh,
It was
wow.
which I think is quite amazing. I don't think
Yeah.
anybody else has ever done that. I've had both papers side by side on the desk in front of me, different
That's
pieces,
awesome.
but I started writing. I've written a few pieces for the Times and the Telegraph, but I started writing for the Spectator,
Mm.
and I've written quite a lot for the Spectator. And I write regularly for them, and it's given. And so I've been able to develop my ideas, and I've almost in the terms of this debate moved from being an activist into the commentary box. Almost look like a sports person moves
Mm.
from actually engaging in the sport to move into the commentary box. I've done pretty much the same thing with in the transgender debate. Whereas 7 or 8 years ago, I was at the thick of it. On Twitter and in meetings, I used to speak at meetings. I'd organise letters to the Times with with one had over 300 signatories. So that sort of thing I was organising. I've sort of moved into the commentary box, so I commentate on this along with other issues in general. But 2 years ago, a book publisher contacted me and said, "What you're saying here is really interesting. Do you want to write a book?"
Mm.
And I said, "Yeah, sure." I said, yeah, I'll give this a go." So I put together a book that hopefully does three things. It gives my history about who I am, where I've
Yeah.
come from, and and the nuts and bolts of my transition. It opens with the gender reassignment surgery,
Mm.
which some men have told me made them cross their legs just reading it. So that's the first stretch to it. Another one was to try and talk about why I thought about my impressions on the debate and why I thought self-ID was not a good idea, and why. So I've brought in the debate about that. But thirdly, about why I actually transitioned. And I've written about this. I don't think it's because I've got a gender identity. I think
Mm.
it's essentially because uh, as a male, my sexual interest is women's bodies. As you know,
Mm.
I'm a heterosexual male, so it's women's bodies. But whereas most men's sexual focus is on other people out there, mine happens to be largely includes myself. So it caused male attraction, heterosexual attraction to a body which was lamentably male. I think that's why I transitioned, and I explain it in the book.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so there's those three things in there. So I wrote a book on this. It's called Transsexual Apostate: My Journey Back to Reality, published by Forum. The paperback is just out, by the way.
Oh, right.
So there's a paperback out there now, which Amazon is selling for less than a tenner. So you could go if you want to know what I think. You can go through all my writings on my blog, but
Mm.
there's over 400 pieces now on my blog, so there's a lot of it there. But if you're wanting a carefully argued discussion of who I am, why I transitioned, and why the debate is going round and round in circles and ended up in a toxic dispute, then
Mm.
it's all carefully curated and discussed and argued in this book. So
Yeah.
I'd recommend it.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Oh, I
there's
would.
there's
Yeah.
there's a hardback, Kindle, paperback. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, congratulations on the book. And uh, I've just found you to be a measured voice in this crazy at times debate. And as you say, and I've said it's quite toxic online. But some of this stuff is going to have to be ironed out soon as I think specifically for women and around the sort of terminology. And I mean the whole question that raged through the lockdowns was what is a woman. It is just absolute insanity to me that people couldn't even answer it, including our own prime minister. And so that's where I think we need to bring some, as you said, some common sense back to back to the the middle, and try and get through this, because I don't want any transgender person being caught up in, the kind of rhetoric bounce back, any of the nastiness out there. But I fear that's the way it's going to continue heading. Because I see it all online. I don't always comment on everything online, but I do see a lot of it. And yeah, I just think life is hard enough for a lot of people, that actually we don't need to be causing more hassle. So yeah, it's nice to have you as a measured voice in this craziness.
Thank you. Thank you. It's been lovely to be with you today.
And then thank you very much, Aisha and Elizabeth. I hope, well, I'm sure, and there'll be lots of people looking at the recording, watching this back, and I'm sure they'll, and I'll pass your details on your website and links for your books and your book and what have you. But thank you very much, Debbie. It's been an absolute pleasure. And I look forward to reading more of your work. And Aisha's waving there.
Yeah, thanks, Aisha.
And yeah, look forward to seeing what's going to happen in the future. But hopefully, yeah, it's a positive outcome for everyone.
Yeah. Oh, thanks for your comment as well, Elizabeth.
Yeah. I think a lot of people will be interested in the book. It's very educational. So thank you very much. Are you back at school next week, Debbie? Are the kids back?
Yes. I've had those. I had the dream. It was not this week. It's the end of last week, when you get to school, and where you're unprepared for the lesson. The class is queuing up outside. You've got no materials, no resources. You forgot what you're supposed to be teaching them. And I don't think I was in my pajamas, but that's a feature of it. Every even if going into my 29th year of teaching, I still suffer this.
I bet. Well, enjoy the first week back
Yeah.
with the students, and yeah, I'll be in touch very soon.
Okay, thank you.
Take care.
Okay, bye.